Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the core of everything. Today we're discussing Stonehenge, which is enigmatic in not only its archaeological history, but also its geological history. A shout out quickly to someone on Instagram, the last of the English gentleman, who commented on one of our podcasts, and he said, on the episode on the moon, and he said, "Do you know what? I love the moon." And that was all he said.
That's kind. Oh, I mean, I guess it's enthusiasm being shown for the moon rather than the podcast, but the moon is great. Thank you to the last of the English gentlemen. That's very kind. Yeah, so this week we are looking at Stonehenge. So Stonehenge is located on the Salisbury Plains. I think it's on the A40 or something. You always hear that on the travel news where it says there's queues backing up past Stonehenge. But this is in Wiltshire in England, and it's a series of megaliths. Mega is big, lith is rock. Lithology is the study of rocks, basically. So it's basically a large stone monument that's part of the Neolithic, or it's a Neolithic circle. And the Neolithic period is from around 10,000 BC through to 2000 BC. Neolithic means new rock, so it's kind of the new Stone Age. Now, they think construction of this actually began as early as 3000 BC, or it could even go all the way back to 5000 BC, making it older than the pyramids of Egypt. And archaeologists estimate it took 1,500 years to put together, from the original emplacement all the way through to the last modification. I imagine they were editing it as they went, add an extension here, little terrace here.
Yeah, a bit of decking.
Yeah. Lots of tea breaks. So Stonehenge, we think it was used for rituals and kind of religious ceremonies, particularly because it aligns with the summer solstice sunrise and the winter solstice sunset. But it was also a burial ground, so an excavation project in 2013 found cremated remains of over 50,000 bones dating back to around 3000 BC. But the rocks themselves tell a story, and this story is enigmatic and mysterious as much as the people of the time are. And these different rock types that we find at Stonehenge imply that they've come from different areas. And finding out where they've come from and what they are helps us to understand the connectivity and kind of the societal dynamics that were at play in prehistoric Britain.
We should probably outline the different rocks that are present at Stonehenge, or at least its structure. So we have this outer circle and an outer horseshoe, which is made up of silicious sandstones, which are sandstones rich in silica, so things like quartz. And these have been named the Sarsen stones. And Sarsen stones and the blue stones, making up these megaliths, as you were talking about, these huge rocks. The Sarsen stones are believed to have been from Marlborough, which is about 25 kilometres north of Stonehenge.
I think we talked about Sarsen recently with one of the What in the Worlds, where Sarsen sandstones are where they've kind of been silicified. So we've got silica that's actually got into the sandstone and effectively cemented it. So these sandstones are actually really kind of tough materials.
And then you have the blue stones. And blue stones is sort of a generic term that means they're exotic to the region. And the combination of these blue stones are about 2 to 3 tons each. So very, very, very heavy. And these comprised of igneous and sedimentary rocks, which have succumbed to low-grade metamorphism. So it means they've had a little bit of heat and pressure that deform them, but not so much that you can't see the original structures of the rock before it got changed. So, for example, in a sandstone, you'll still be able to see things like maybe ripples in the sandstone or cross-bedding or those sort of things. Or an igneous rock, you'll be able to still see basalt flows. And the igneous rocks at Stonehenge are typically sort of dolerites and rhyolites. In sedimentary rocks, there are also sandstones, and one in this bluestone group is called the altar stone, which we'll get onto in a little bit. And in the Antiquaries Journal in 1923, H. Thomas identified that the bluestones were from a Neolithic quarry from, excuse my pronunciation, people from Wales, but Mynydd Preseli area.
Double D might be a TH, maybe. I don't know, so it might be Mynydd. But then that sounds Lord of the Rings like, doesn't it?
So it could be from Minas Tirith, yeah. A quarry from Mynydd Preseli area of West Wales. And these have containing little tiny microfossils in the sandstones. And you can see this correlation between Stonehenge and West Wales. So you can see this correlation between microfossils from different areas, and therefore they're believed to be associated with each other. But go back into the altar stone, there's been a really recent discovery where the altar stone may not be from the same source as all the blue stones and sarsen stones.
Yeah, so as you said, Jack, most of these megaliths are thought to be sourced from Wales. I think this was discovered, it was discovered in 1923 by Henry Herbert, as you said, H. Thomas, which is such a strong name, and I imagine quite Welsh as well. But yeah, so the altar stone, this one in the middle, it's kind of unknown where it's come from. In terms of the lithology, so the rock type, remember lith means rock, it's a pale green micaceous sandstone. So that means it's a sandstone that has mica in it that's often associated with muds and clays. And interestingly, the mineralogy doesn't contain any alkali feldspar, which is just a type of mineral.
And why is that interesting?
Well, it's interesting because it means it needs to have come from a particular type of rock, kind of particular settings that it formed in, which we'll get it. We'll swing back round to that at the end of this little story. So we thought the altar stone might be from Mill Bay in Pembrokeshire, close to where some of the bluestones came from, and then they would have transported it through the Bristol Channel. But recent work looking at zircons in these rocks showed that the isotope geochemistry didn't match. So zircons are what's called detrital grains. So they're quite tough, resistant grains that form in magma chambers. And then as we get erosion, they are broken out of volcanic rocks or igneous rocks and then taken up into sedimentary rocks as sedimentary rocks form. And then later we can go back and look at these detrital zircons and work out kind of where they've come from. And through this, our sedimentary rocks, which are comprised of other basically sediments, they're comprised of other things from other rocks. They give us a fingerprint of the geological history. So what we can do is we can take these zircon grains, we can analyze their ages and their geochemistry, and can compare them to rocks from elsewhere in Britain to give an idea of the source. And I'll come back to this in a moment, but this is helpful because a lot of terrains in Britain have quite discrete age components. So in certain geological ages, we had certain rock forming events, basically, which means if you can work out how old the zircons are, you can tie it quite nicely to a certain event in a certain place. So this work was done by a PhD student called Anthony Clarke, who's now at Curtin University in Perth, but I believe he has Welsh heritage. And he was looking at the ages in the geochemistry of various detrital grains and crystals within the altar stone. So he's looking at zircons, apatites, and rutile. So rutile is titanium dioxide. Apatite is a phosphate mineral, so it's got phosphorus and oxygen. So we've got rutile, we've got apatite, and then we've got our zircons as well. So these are all our kind of detrital grains. And the good thing about zircons is that they're very durable, and also you get substitution within these grains. So zircon grain is made up of zirconium and oxygen, and the zirconium sometimes swaps out. You get elemental substitution for uranium and thorium. And these are our kind of age calibrators because they decay into lead. So we can use that decay system because we know how quickly they decay to work out how old the rock is. So zircon, apatite, and rutile.
A lot of geologists like apatite. They've got a hunger for it.
Zircon.
You're talking about zircon. So zircon contains uranium and lead, and the rate at which uranium decays to lead, you can calculate the original age of the rock.
Yeah, that's right.
Or the original age of the rock where the zircons came from, because the zircons are found in sedimentary rocks, whereas originally they were from, metamorphic or igneous rocks.
Yeah. And imagine, like, an analogy for this maybe is that you've got a load of eggs that are going to hatch into chicks, and all your eggs are your uranium atoms. You're looking confused, but bear with me. Your eggs are your uranium atoms, and let's say they all take the same length of time to hatch. If you know how many eggs you started with, or you started with only eggs and no chicks, and then you know how many chicks you've ended up with because you're looking at your garden now, and you can count the number of chicks, and you know how long it took for those eggs to turn into chicks, you can then work out how old that... this falls down.
We've lost it. He's lost it.
Bottled it.
It was a cracking analogy.
What a pun.
Yeah.
Even if it was just for the pun, it was worth it. Anyway, let's ignore that analogy. But basically, you know that you started off with uranium, and then a large proportion of it has now decayed into lead. We know how long that decay takes. So by looking at how much lead we have now, we can work out how old these...
You can date back to when the rock had 100% uranium.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And so what we can do is we compare the ages of these grains. So the age of the grains indicate they derive from Laurentian crystalline source, which is then overprinted by Grampian, which is about 460 million years ago, magmatism. And by comparing these signatures with rocks all the way around the UK, particularly with other sandstones, that is, across Britain and Ireland, there's a high correlation or similarity with the old red sandstone from the Devonian in northeast Scotland.
And just while you're on this, if I can just mention that this is what we're talking about with that discrete fingerprint. So imagine you've got like a histogram. So that means on the x-axis you have like time, on the y-axis you have like number of counts. And if you're looking at your zircons, some points in time will have lots and lots of zircons that were formed at that time because it represents a specific geological event that was occurring. So that's your database effectively. So then you can go and look at your zircons and see where they plot on this axis, on the time axis. And if they correlate to one of these peaks in time, you know that they were associated with a particular formation event. And actually this Grampian magmatism you're talking about was the same magmatism that created Ben Nevis and what formed the Dalradian metasediments. So these are sediments that, as you were saying, have had some kind of low-grade metamorphism. I've actually done some field work up there. That's where we've been.
It's quite a famous place for geologists to go in sort of second, first years, isn't it?
Yeah.
And go and have the geologically map the areas.
Yeah. But you're absolutely right. You were saying that this fingerprint correlates with these rocks in northeast Scotland that are similar to rocks found on Orkney, right?
Yes, and the old red sandstone is found all over the UK.
Okay.
In Devonian age, it's found in Northern Ireland as well. It's found in Scotland, obviously. But it seems that this specific rock in northeast Scotland is the one that correlates most similarly with the rocks, the altar stone in Stonehenge, and that's 750 kilometers apart from each other, from their locations. 750 kilometers. So the altar stone has been measured to be about 6 tons. So if we're looking in terms of transport, that's kind of tricky by humans. Some people believe that some of the transport happened or was aided by ice. So thousands of years before Stonehenge was built, the travel from either Wales or Scotland down to Stonehenge, rocks may have been eroded, picked up from ice in this glacial world, and then transported towards Stonehenge, at least helping some of the Neolithic humans to build Stonehenge.
That's really interesting. I'm imagining this glacier kind of just like gets all the way down south and then just stops at Stonehenge and then melts and drops the altar stone. And they're like, perfect.
Yeah. And all the humans like lining up watching it happen.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, well, I mean, see, Scotland's quite far. 750 kilometers is quite a way for ice to travel the rock. But it does perhaps enlighten us to the advanced society in terms of organization. What it does imply is that the rock was transported by sea, where it was a lot easier for it to go those distances. So that's Stonehenge, and that's a fascinating discovery. So thank you very much. And is it Anthony Clarke?
Yeah. From
Curtin University in Perth. And if Anthony is listening, then come on to the podcast and we can talk about it more.
Well, we'd love to hear. There's this was published in Nature actually earlier this year. And there was also a BBC article about it, and there was a great picture of him there as a PhD student, and then him there when he was much younger, being held by his dad, I think it was. Oh, nice. So it's nice that these things come full circle.
Yeah, I thought like Stonehenge.
Oh yeah,
as it were. Yeah. What in the world?
On the topic of ancient monuments and transportation of big rocks, megaliths, I wanted to briefly talk about the Moai. Do you know what the Moai are? Have you heard of them?
Well, it sounds like New Zealand Maori, but what is them?
Yeah, you'll know it. So these are those famous stone statues on Easter Island, which have like the heads of people.
Yes. Well, then it's just the big heads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the big heads.
Like, Night at the Museum.
I've not seen it.
Okay, well, carry on.
Yeah. I'm sure our audience have. I'm not very well versed in pop culture, so yeah. Anyway, so Easter Island is an island that's about 4,000 kilometers west of Chile, so it's just kind of in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And they've got these big statues on them that were created by the Rapa Nui people between around 1400 and 1650 AD, so a bit more recent than Stonehenge. And there's over 900 statues, up to 10 meters tall, and some of them are up to 75 tons in weight. So pretty heavy. Bit of geology about Easter Island. So Easter Island is part of the Easter Seamount chain. So this is a bit like the islands of Hawaii are on a chain of volcanism. This chain's been erupting or was erupting between 780 and 110,000 years ago. So quite recent volcanism. And it's very close to the East Pacific Rise, which is a spreading centre. But actually, Easter Island itself is much younger than the Pacific rises. So
and the spreading centre is where two plates are diverging.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Interestingly, a ridge is where the spreading rates are quite slow, so it builds up into a ridge, whereas a rise is where they're quite fast and it doesn't produce a ridge. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
So the question is, how did Easter Island form? Well, it could be that there's like some leaky faults that are letting some kind of magma coming up through the surface, or like a hot line rather than a hot spot, or maybe even a kind of a new plate boundary that's trying to be born, because we don't quite have the same kind of dynamics as Hawaii. Anyway, that's Easter Island. We've got these moai, which, like Stonehenge, were thought to be ceremonial or religious, and each statue represents one of the ancestors of the Rapa Nui people who watches over the island. Now, the statues were created from volcanic tuff. So volcanic tuff is basically consolidated ash. So it's quite lightweight, but it's also very strong, which is good for making these kind of statues. A bit like the silicified sandstone that we have at Stonehenge.
These are quite big. I remember seeing them. They're a few meters, aren't they?
Yeah.
Tall.
Yeah. Up to 75 tons, I think, was the biggest one.
75 tons of tuff.
Yeah.
Jeez.
It's a lot, isn't it? Yeah. And some of these have been transported up to 18 kilometres. Not quite as far as the Stonehenge altar stone, but still quite a long way.
On their face as well.
Yeah, just dragging them through the dirt. So they're made of tuff that's been mined from a quarry called Rano Raraku. And then they've also, some of them have got like little hats that are actually like top knots. And they're called pakau. And they are made from scoria. So scoria is like a really vesicular, like bubbly lava, effectively. It's cooled so quickly that the bubbles haven't escaped. It has a nice reddish colour, but it's also very, very light because it's got lots of vesicles in it, lots of bubbles. So quite easy to transport. The big question is, how were these things transported? You know, they're so heavy, and people didn't really know. They thought maybe they used wooden sledges or rolling logs. But there's been some recent studies that think they were actually walked from where they were carved out of the quarry. So they think they were actually carved and made in the quarry and then transported. And they think that they were walked. And the reason people think this is, there were some archaeologists called Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo.
Sorry, when you say they were walked, you mean people carried them? What do you mean by they were walked?
So they were like shuffled along the ground and rocked from side to side.
Ah, I see what you mean. Okay.
Yeah. So these archaeologists found that it had like a 14-degree angle at the base, and they thought, why is it kind of rounded like this? And they reckoned it must be for walking them. So what they did was they gathered a team of volunteers, got some massive rocks. I think they put some ropes through the eye sockets because they looked like, you know, you could attach things to them, and then walked these massive rocks around with their team of volunteers, and found that it worked pretty well. And so they reckon that that's probably how these things were moved.
Wow. That's a really good one. So they've got rounded edges because it's worn away at the sides.
Well, I think they designed it like that, so they might have kind of quarried it out to have rounded edges, so they could then rock them from. Because I guess a rounded base maybe is easier to rock.
To rock a rock, 700 and how many tons? How many tons?
75 tons.
75 tons. To rock a rock 75 tons requires quite a bit of leverage and people.
Yeah.
I'd imagine.
Yeah. I don't know what the population was of these people, and they actually think that deforestation caused the society's decline. But there's still some unfinished statues in the volcanic quarry, this Ranu Raraku. So I imagine they tried to move some, maybe some fell over, an ear broke off, and like, we'll start again.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if there's a little Hansel and Gretel trail of these little faces.
Yeah, like a nose. An eye.
Exactly, yeah. And then there's just like a stump at the end. Where That's a really good one in the world. Thank you, Mark.
My pleasure.
How did you come up with all these? Are these just your reading, or is this something that you found online, or what's happened there?
Yeah, it's mostly not my reading. Some of it is, but it's more just trying to find interesting stories. ChatGPT is quite helpful, but doesn't always know what you're looking for. You know, it can be a bit bog standard, but if you normally it gives me some things, and then I just type more, and then it gives me more, and then keep typing more until I get what I want.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, gang. Thanks very much, and speak to you next time.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.